Growing up, my family would spend every Christmas Eve going across the street to have Christmas dinner with our Cuban neighbors. And we would always arrive a little bit early, not out of pleasantries or out of convenience, but because from across the street, we could always smell when the lechon was almost ready. And there was always enough pork to go around, but there were certain parts of the pig that were always in high demand. My goal was to get the ear. I loved the flavor. It was salty, it was crispy, and there was this thin layer of fat that just melted in your mouth. But at the time, I didn't realize why that mattered. I never thought about the history of eating from snout to tail, or the fact that you could encompass an entire culture in one bite. I've lived in the Northeast now for 11 years, and the reality is that my food looks very different today. I'm a regular at Whole Foods and at Trader Joe's, and I love a Saturday morning at the farmer's market. My fridge is stocked with oat milk and organic eggs when I can afford them. But last year, I saw something that made me pause and smile. My favorite Brooklyn taqueria, taco shop, was opening a second location, and this one was focused on just one thing, the pig. Carnitas de Ramirez opened up in full force to educate, to feed, and to enamorar, to make people fall in love with every part of the pig. Their tacos highlight so many flavors, from brain, tongue, intestines, uterus, and yes, the ear. The menu made me realize how easy it is for flavors to slip away when we're not paying attention to them. The taco, in reality, is a social construct, I realized. It's a narrative of adaptation, of appropriation, and of transformation. And like any social construct, it's fragile. It's shaped by power, by perception, and the forces that define what story prevails. And preservation isn't just about keeping things alive, but it's about keeping them alive in a world that's constantly trying to reshape them. So, this is where behavioral science comes in. We often use behavioral science as a tool to change, to nudge, and to innovate. But what if we used it as a means for preservation, to ensure that the foods, the flavors, and the cultures enshrined in them continue to thrive? You might argue that the taco is as strong as ever. You can get one in any part of this country. But that's the paradox. While Mexican cuisine thrives, the people behind them are being pushed to the margins. Restaurant workers are made up of 43% of Latinos in the US, many of them Central American and Mexican. But despite running Americans' kitchens, they're often unseen, underpaid, and frequently undocumented. Their contributions overshadowed by our love for their food. Now, America has a varied diet, but a cuisine that's kind of formulaic. If it's crunchy, meaty, and drenched in sauce, it's something that'll sell. Americans don't just love new foods, they love foods that feel familiar. Psychologist Paul Rosen calls this the omnivore's paradox. As humans, we love novelty, but we also fear things that are unfamiliar. Tacos were originally cooked with these slow stewed meats and organs, but the American palate wasn't ready, so the taco had to change. In 1950s, Glenn Bell was a burger stand owner in California, and he saw these long lines of people standing outside the taquerias across the street. He saw an opportunity, not to bring Mexican food to Americans, but to reinvent what Mexican food was to make it more palatable for Americans. He reverse engineered the taco. He brought in lean ground beef, shredded cheese, a dollop of sour cream. The taco had to become something softer. Think of it as a glorified burger. A deconstructed patty, lettuce, tomato, and God forbid, mayo. But it worked. In 1962, Taco Bell was formed. And by 1978, Pepsi had acquired over 800 franchises and spread it to be the conglomerate that we know it as today. The taco industrial complex, check. Once the taco was born, something else started to shift. It wasn't just how the taco was made that changed, it was also how we came to think about it. Our mental model of what the taco was evolving. We didn't even know it was happening. This is what in behavioral science we call change blindness. When gradual shifts happen over time, outside of our focal point, we might not even register them. And if they happen over time and slowly, we don't even question them. And this can be true even for people within the community. For second-generation Latinos, many people have a different concept of the food than what they're cooking even at home. It's what mainstream that matters. There's a study on diaspora communities that shows when immigrants get to a new location, they change their food habits as expected, and at first it's just because of what's available. But over time, it changes more because of the social norms, what's mainstream, what's in the media, what restaurants are selling. This is what we call the availability heuristic. The more we see something, the more real it becomes. And when that thing becomes the default, it changes how we eat and what we believe to be true. Again, you might argue that traditions are always evolving, but what happens when the people who created them are no longer in control? This shift didn't just change how Americans saw tacos, but who had the power to define them. Food traditions don't survive alone. They depend on the people who pass them down, and those networks are breaking. Immigration policies are tearing families apart, and they're pushing out undocumented food workers at every level of the food chain. And this is severing a critical link in culinary knowledge. Gentrification is displacing family-owned businesses for high-end interpretations that are rediscovering what authenticity is. The behavioral study of network effects explains how these traditions have survived. Damon Santola has this theory of complex contagion, which says that the stronger and more connected a community is, the stronger those behaviors and traditions and practices. Food traditions also spread through broader networks. It's important to get information from people outside of our immediate networks. But the reality is that the strength of these weak ties are loose connections, and while they help in diffusion, they're not always so helpful for preservation. We assume that food will always be there, but history tells us that when these networks break, behaviors shift, and what was essential can sometimes fade. So, where do I think behavioral science can help? This weekend, I want you to go have a taco, but challenge yourself at every step of the way and think about what's influencing your decision. How did you decide where to go? Did you ask close friends, or did the infatuation tell you what the hottest taco in town is? When you're ordering, did you default to what's familiar, or did you notice any ingredients that you might normally skip? What stories do you associate with what you're ordering? What's your own mental model? What were you expecting? Now, we're not going to stop the erasure of food and cultures by behavior science alone, and definitely not just by eating a taco. But behavioral science tells us that what we think, what we pay attention to, and how we connect with others matters. So start with a taco, but make it a taco that makes you think. Thank you.